I did a bit of testing or messing around with the Nikon Z9 and the sharpening settings because people seem to be complaining the Nikon Z9 is very noisy. And actually, when I was working in Ukraine, I spoke to a Getty Images photographer who also said, this camera seems to be, not very usable above ISO 6400. And but in one of the Facebook Z9 groups, I saw someone say, just turn down the mid-range sharpening. So I thought, okay, when I have time, I will go and test this. So I did a test. And so first of all, let's look at the default settings and why people say this camera might be noisy at higher ISO or higher sensitivity settings. So you can see even in this full-size image, this is on a 5K monitor. You can see it's quite a rough looking image. To be honest, I don't mind the sharpening algorithm in the Nikon at all because, this sounds kind of cheesy, but it's a very, quite an organic, very film-like, it looks like a filmic grain. So it's not annoying at all. It's just that, with less noise or less sharpening, you can get better gradients between colors and better skin tone gradients. And in my work especially, I work in a lot of low light situations, and it's really hard to know exactly what you're going to get when you work on those type of situations, and exposures can vary. So to make sure that you have the best possible image to work with later, and especially if you need to rescue an image because it's underexposed or overexposed or whatever, and you need the maximum amount of information you can work with, the best thing is to have the least amount of in-camera processing, because it's better to have it processed afterwards, and just basically get the most basic image out of the camera with the least amount of processing. So if I blow this up to 100%, you can see there's noise here everywhere, and this is with the default sharpening settings in the picture profile settings in the Nikon Z9, which is the basic sharpening set at 3, and then I think the mid-range sharpening at 1, I think. So things to look at are here: background noise. So there's quite a rough transition from dark to mid-tones to lighter tones. Skin tones are a bit rough. You can see that some color noise starts to creep in, whether it's not pure color anymore or the color that's supposed to be recorded. Details are nice and pronounced. Everything is like, for example, if you look at this text, it's very legible. It's easy on the eye in a way. Details here in the cardboard cutouts of the color checker chart are very pronounced. I mean, you can really easily see a lot of detail, right? And it's a very clean kind of sharpening. It doesn't really mess a lot with the edges. You can see a bit here, edges are starting to get confused where the sharpening sort of messes with the transition from the edge to the background. But it's not bad at all, actually. I mean, it's in my opinion still a very high quality image, but I think we can do better. So if we check now, so I mess around first of all with the basic sharpening setting, and if we compare this to, so this is +3 compared to -3, this is just the basic sharpening setting, and you can already see from this view, there's a smoother background here compared to this one, right? And now if we zoom into 100%, then this skin definitely looks a bit smoother, right? And I think there's just more color information there as well. So if you check this out, you can see that there's a bit, this is more as a blotch of color rather than a blotch of noise, which is what it is here. Of course, in all fairness, although there could be just due to the autofocus, these eyelashes are much less clearly visible than here. But skin tone definitely much nicer, background much nicer, And then the letters here in the color checker chart, yeah, they're worse off, definitely. It doesn't look as nicely pronounced. It might even look as if, the lens is not sharp, or it's maybe under sharpened. But let's go on. We're not done yet. So what I finally started doing is messing around with the basic sharpening and the mid-range sharpening, because the story is tone down the mid-range sharpening, because that is really what the human eye, or the human eye, the visual processor picks up the most. So there's three types of sharpening basically in photos, where there's between very contrasty areas, which is like a low frequency sharpening, and then there's high frequency sharpening, which is very fine detail, and then there's the in between, which is just basic detail, which is the mid-range frequency or mid-range sharpening. So the nice thing about the Nikon cameras is that you can adjust all three levels of sharpening, which I'm not sure you can do in Canons. I mean, I had a Canon R3, but I didn't bother really touching the sharpening settings because it looked good from the get-go. But anyway, so here we're going to compare an image with +5, which is the maximum basic sharpening, and +3, which is, I believe, the maximum setting for mid-range sharpening, and compare that to the setting with the lowest amount of sharpening for both low frequency sharpening or basic sharpening and mid-range frequency. So the low sharpening image is on the right here, and on the left here is the higher, with the maximum settings, maximum sharpening settings. And you can already tell this is quite a smooth background. This background obviously has a lot of artifacting or sharpening or noise going on in it. And also this image looks a bit less natural, because you can tell it's like there's added detail or just a bit too much processing going on. But let's look at 100%. And if we zoom to 100%, then you can definitely tell this image is much, much smoother. So there's definitely much better color gradient. And look at the highlights, for example, above her lip and on her lip. Those are very nice and smooth. It's almost like the way you would see it in real life. Whereas on the left image, where the sharpening is going on, there's a very harsh transition from the highlight to the mid-range of the lip. Not only that, but the highlighted part is almost just a white blob. Probably all information there is lost. Whereas there's still some gradient going on. Almost nothing is blown out in terms of highlights in the lip highlight gloss. Then when we look at the texts, here, of course, there's much more texture that you can obviously see in the color checker chart, in the plastic here and the cardboard part, and the letters are much more pronounced. Then again, even though this may seem almost as if it's being a little bit foggy or soft, it is a more natural image, and there's really no detail lost. It doesn't look very like there's a lot of acuity, but there's also, you're not missing anything. It just looks less pronounced. And at the end of the day, I think a more natural looking image, which this is with the, less sharpened image, looks much, much nicer and gives you a lot more to work with. One of the most important things is what you can see here in the color charts. So here there's a lot of noise, but not only is there sharpening artifacts, but there's also color noise. So you're not recording the color in the processing in the camera is being turned into different kinds of colors because of the sharpening algorithm. And usually you can mitigate this in post-processing, but it's going to go at the cost of sharpness in general, and you're never going to get the colors looking as natural and as wholesome as they were if you had turned down the sharpening in camera. So colors are definitely much, much smoother, especially if you look here at this yellow and this orange. They just look, they're a lot smoother, and that will give you a lot more to work with at the end of the day, because you'll be able to push the contrast much more, the saturation or the vibrance much more to your, you'll be able to adjust them much more to your liking without having a penalty, paying a penalty for that. And you'll still have the same amount of information at the end of the day to work with. You can also see it, for example, here in this metal grip here. There's a smoother transition here from dark to this highlight. And here it looks, especially in this transition area from dark to mid-tone, it just looks a bit over-processed. So, and you can see this in the background. So basically it also comes to the benefit of the bokeh. Your bokeh will look more, a lot smoother because the transitions look smoother. And less harsh, which basically is what you want out of bokeh. You want things, background, to look smooth. So highlights are less affected because highlights are less contrasty and there's smoother transitions and there's less artifacting. So it really is to the benefit of the bokeh and the image in general. And if the bokeh looks smoother or the background looks smoother, it also means that the in focus parts of your image will have much more pop from the background. And at the end of the day, that will make for a much more pleasing image. And also, I think when you view it at just normal viewing distance like this, you can even tell then that highlights have smoother transitions, so the image just looks much more natural. And I really think this is very well done by Nikon, that it allows you to adjust it in this amount that you can opt for if you want a very pronounced and sharpened image for those who like, but still the image processing and the adjustment allow for a result that is very, very natural looking, very pleasing to the eye, and I think at the end of the day, in the long run, much more pleasing. The image on the right here, I think in the long run is much more pleasing, even though at first look the image on the left, the sharpened image, might pop out more because it's, text is more legible, edges are more contrasty, more well defined. But at the end of the day, this is also it's not about how much the image is processed or how sharp the image is coming out of the camera or how much it's sharpened during post-processing, but it's also how your brain perceives it. So at the end of the day, if you look long enough at the image which has less sharpening applied, your brain will think that that is a very acute image or a very sharp image because it won't know any better. It's only when you directly compare the two that it makes one look soft and the other one looks more pleasing to your brain. But in the long run, there's more benefit in having an unsharpened image which you can sharpen up later if you need to, and certainly because it's a digital image, so that it means it's artificial in a sense. It's the more natural image you can get straight out of camera, the better. So at the end, by messing around a bit with the settings, my favorite setting is, let me think, I didn't even mark it. So I think what I settled for at the end of the day is 0 overall sharpening, because if you set clarity below 0, it looks like the image becomes soft on purpose. And you do want like a basic level of, some sort of clarity or pop or contrastiness. And then the mid-range sharpening I set to the minimum, because that looked the best to me because it gives you the smoothest colors. And I think I opted for sharpening of the basic sharpening of -1, which I think is my favorite. So it's, I think this image, -1, -5, 0. So if we compare what is the default standard picture profile setting compared to what I ended up with, which is -1 basic sharpening, -5, so the lowest setting of mid-range sharpening, to make the image have the smoothest possible transitions and the least amount of artifacting that is most visible to the eye, and then clarity of 0 so that it has a basic contrastiness or acuity, whatever you want to call it. I think that's the most pleasing, most natural looking image, which also gives you the most to work with, or the most information to work with while giving the most natural image. So if I enlarge or compare those two, then if I blow it up, I don't know what this is. So I think that, yeah, this is +3 standard settings, and my final settings. I think the color is even a lot better, so it's less desaturated. This image for some reason is more desaturated. But I mean, I think, for example, here you can see it looks as if the eye is much sharper and you can see more detail. But I think that might be a lot of, let's say, made up detail or perceived detail, not true detail. And if you look here, I think this looks really natural. I mean, it could be that you maybe set up basic sharpening or mid-range sharpening just one notch higher. But I think at the end of the day, you don't really lose anything. The benefits really outweigh anything else. Because if you look, for example, these eyelashes here, here they look much more pronounced and clear, but at the end of the day, you can just as easily distinguish all the eyelashes here as from here, but they look more natural here, and actually they're thinner here than here. They're a bit thicker, which means here there's sharpening applied, and there's just, you know, let's say artificial pixels, made up pixels, whatever you want to name it. But, you know, this looks much, much smoother. So it looks much closer to, for example, because this is ISO 6400, this image, because the in-camera sharpening has been reduced, especially the mid-range sharpening, looks much, much closer to a ISO 100 image or a base setting ISO image than it does to then a regular ISO 6400 image with basic settings, you know, basic sharpening settings. And at the end of the day, for example, if you check out the texture here in the plastic, it doesn't look that much less pronounced. And it actually looks much more natural because especially the highlights here, there's a lot more information in the highlights than here, where, you know, this coarse texture here, probably there's not a lot you can do to repair that. It's just, it is what it is. And most importantly, these color charts here, you can see how much smoother color is, which means at the end of the day, you can bump up contrast much more. You can even use you can use sharpening if you feel the need to, but you can, you know, definitely manipulate the image with a much more satisfying and a more subtle result and a more pleasing result at the end of the day than if you started out with that sharpening. And so I think it really pays to adjust the settings and the picture profiles in the camera and the Z9. And at the end of the day, also, I think, you know, the Z9 is not a noisy camera. It's just that the default factory settings with which it comes makes it look as if it's a noisy camera. But what you're really seeing is just artifacting from in-camera processing. But I mean, at the end of the day, this for ISO 6400 is an extremely good looking image, and you know, is no worse than any camera of this caliber. I don't think there's any camera, no Canon R3 or Sony A1 that looks better at this sensitivity. So I think Nikon did a really great job, and I think with this you can really move forward and easily use pictures, you know, higher sensitivity settings such as ISO 12800, which I also regularly use in my work, and I feel really confident about this camera. And I would argue it's just as good, if not better, than the competition. Just one more thing, guys. So samples of these, there's a link below, and I publish all the photos I made so you can compare all these settings with clarity and sharpening and whatever, all the different combinations. So you can see for yourself what the camera looks like. They're all at ISO 6400, and they have different combinations of sharpening, so you can see for yourself and examine and do what you like with the pictures, as long as it's not for commercial use. And if there's anything else you'd like me to test, let me know in the comments below. I think I might do a video on the Z6 compared to the Z9 for video. I'm filming on the Z6 right now, and the image quality is lovely, but 4K 60 cropped is a bit of a nuisance, and then the battery drains pretty fast. So thanks for watching, guys, and see you next time.